Welcome back to Tide Pod on the YouTube home of Tide Illustrated. Jack Knowlton, Tony Tsoukalis, finding some time amid this transfer portal hubbub to record a podcast. Putting out there right now anything that happens after 10:26 p.m. on Thursday, December 19th, which is when we are.
AM.
Sorry, did I say p.m.? A.m.
AM.
10:26 a.m. on Thursday, December 19th, when we are recording this pod that you will all listen to Friday morning. Anything that happens between that now and then, we're off the hook for, because it seems like something is happening once every minute in the transfer portal for Alabama. But, we have to bring you a pod at some point. But there is still, Tony, plenty of things to discuss. And, of course, go over to Tide Illustrated. We've got our kind of portal timeline. We've got stories on the new transfers, which we're going to talk about here in just a little bit. So plenty to dive into there. But for the sake of timeliness and understanding time frames and all that, that's when we're recording the pod and all that fun stuff. But Tony, still plenty of stuff to talk about since we last recorded on last Friday. And Alabama, the biggest news, I think, a returner or a guy withdrawing his name from the portal in a crazy saga. And that's where I kind of wanted to start with Jaylen Mbakwe, of course, the former 5-star freshman corner, one of the better in-state pulls from 2024. He got everyone's week started with a bang. If you cover the Alabama beat or are a loyal fan of Alabama, on Monday, Mbakwe announced his intentions to enter the portal. The rest of that day, there was, of course, a lot of backlash from fans. There was stuff said from some current other players. Ryan Williams, of course, chimed in. The two host their own podcast together. Eventually, there was a post from Ryan Williams with him and Mbakwe that said, I believe it was, "We got action."
We got action. They're going to make that into a shirt.
Totally. You got to milk that for all it's worth. There was some rumblings even that night that there might have been some second thoughts. And then by Tuesday morning, Mbakwe was back out of the portal and re-upping his commitment to Alabama. Crazy saga, Tony. I just want your take on kind of what you make of all of it with this guy and him deciding to stay. And obviously, of course, a huge win for Alabama in the end to have him back, which we'll get into specifically in a second. But just what's your take on this entire chaotic situation over that transpired over that 24 hours?
You wouldn't be surprised if Alabama re-upped its commitment to Jaylen Mbakwe as well. That seems like he probably ended up on the plus side of some extra NIL money from that. Look, it was surprising. I think it just shows you the kind of I guess the kind of NIL world we're in, where there was rumors that Jaylen Mbakwe was being offered in the 7-figure range, which is just incredible for a guy that hasn't started yet. Played really minimal defensive snaps, but he's obviously a great 5-star cornerback. Really a guy that and this is the other part of that report, is that there was offers for him to play on both sides of the ball. That could be something he does at Alabama as well, moving forward, especially in the bowl game. When Alabama is down to 4 receivers, having Jaylen Mbakwe, they probably will end up using him as a receiver at times in the bowl game. I wouldn't be surprised if they do that. But I think that the thing with him is just it really helps keeping his his depth and his talent in the defense. He might not be somebody that's contributed already, but he's a big part of Alabama's plans moving forward. I said from the start that he, out of the cornerbacks they signed, with Xavier Brown and him and Zay Mincy, I always thought he was the highest ceiling. I think Xavier Brown was the most ready, and that's and I'm not trying to take anything away from his game as well, but I thought Jaylen Mbakwe just had the highest ceiling as an athlete. He played on both sides of the ball in high school, so he's a little bit more raw on the defensive side. I think he's probably gotten a little bit more polished there. But I think it's huge that they kept him. I mean, obviously, included in all this is yesterday when Greg Byrne call to action for Alabama fans to fight back and open up their checkbooks and fight back, basically, and fund Yay Alabama, because you have people trying to steal. I mean, that's pretty much a direct reaction to almost losing Jaylen Mbakwe. And so I think that's interesting as well. And it's tough, because I'm sure if you're an Alabama donor or just an Alabama fan that even donates casually to Alabama, it's kind of tough to keep on seeing like, oh my gosh, we're giving every year and it never stops. But that's kind of the world that college, football that we're in right now. That you kind of have to keep on funding this beast because other teams will. And for Alabama, it's kind of an interesting situation because like Alabama's still, it's been a while since they've seen a title, but they've still seen multiple titles and a lot of success. And you look at these, programs that are funding big money like A&M, like Miami. These people haven't seen titles in decades, and so you're competing with desperate fan bases who are just doling out money, right and left, just for whatever it costs to see their team be relevant again. And so I think that's when you look at it, Alabama's going to kind of have to match that passion, which is tough. I mean, it's tough to get a fan base that has seen winning to continue it. It's almost like the complacency that Saban was fighting against, but monetarily, and it's tough to kind of get the fan base to do that. But I don't think Alabama's poor by any means. I don't think they're going to lose a ton of players, but Alabama's also not the biggest bully on the market when it comes to NIL. So you're going to see people like this. You're going to see. I mean, they fortunately they were able to keep Jaylen Mbakwe. They weren't fortunate enough to keep Caleb Odom, and I think there'll be other players that are, potential difference makers that will leave because of NIL deals. But, Alabama also has some money to bring in some other players as well. It's not, the sky isn't falling in Tuscaloosa. But this is something we're going to have to kind of deal with moving forward. I think you're just going to see it a lot. I mean, they survived this Jaylen Mbakwe scare. There'll be another Jaylen Mbakwe situation in the future, and it won't end up as rosy for Alabama.
Yeah, that's a really good point I think you make with it's a program in a really interesting spot of that limbo period between you did a lot of winning, you were able to rely a lot on that, and now you kind of have to transition to match the level of these programs that are investing a lot of money to get back to winning, and that's where Alabama has been. It is sort of a unique situation, and I like your take on Burns' call to action there. And of course, Caleb Odom ended up committing to Ole Miss, I believe, just on Wednesday. So that situation was fully done. He's going to stay in the SEC. But with Mbakwe, Tony, and I want to go back to what you said about him specifically, the offensive side of the ball. You talked about it. Alabama is going to be pretty thin at receiver for the bowl game. Kalen DeBoer confirmed they're only going to have 4 scholarship receivers available, just with some injuries, and obviously the guys that have transferred out, like Caleb Odom. What else did the coaches, we had a chance to ask them about Jaylen Mbakwe, and obviously, they were going to play a bit coy. It's early on, since all of these conversations have kind of started, but the bowl game does provide an interesting opportunity. And of course, Jaylen Mbakwe, a guy in high school who played both ways, who has this athleticism. What did the coaches maybe say, whether it was, Nick Sheridan, Kane Womack, and DeBoer, about that potential, as much as they're probably going to save some of those conversations for later on?
Not much. I don't think they want to force their hand, force their own hand one way or the other. I mean, if they really had huge plans of Jaylen Mbakwe being this offensive star, they would have put him in already. So this is something that they might experiment with. They might experiment it because they have to out of need, in terms of just this bowl game and being down to 4 receivers. And then B, if it's something that's going to keep Jaylen Mbakwe in Tuscaloosa, then maybe they'll throw in a few packages. I mean, it's kind of you might see this more and more in college football with Travis Hunter. Might have opened up a door where people see, oh, geez, he got to contribute on both sides of the ball. I can do that. I did that in high school. So we'll see if that if that becomes a trend. I remember I didn't follow Ohio State like too closely, but I know that Caleb Downs wanted they put him in some offensive packages or something. He practiced. That was the storyline with him. So you're seeing some of these really uber talented, especially defensive backs that can play a bunch of different positions, want to contribute on the offensive side of the ball. One of the things that might I guess kind of feed that need is special teams, where Jaylen Mbakwe can be a punt returner. That's really what Alabama's coaches talked about more, about how they like him as a punt returner. DeBoer said, you don't always feel confident with a defensive guy going back there and taking punts just because they're not used to catching the ball. He said he doesn't feel that. He doesn't feel those, that anxiety when he sends Jaylen Mbakwe back there. It's pretty comfortable. So I think that's going to be his role, moving forward. I could see him getting that, not really going with Ryan Williams, because you don't really want to risk, not like you really super want to risk Jaylen Mbakwe because he's going to be a talent, but we still don't have him projected as a starter on defense. We can get to that later.
Mm-hmm.
But I think he's a guy that is probably going to step in more to that special teams kick returner and punt returner role. And that might be a way to kind of get him more involved as well. But he's definitely a guy that can, make plays with the ball in his hand. We saw that in high school. I mean, he was a two-way star in high school. He wasn't just a defensive player that, I think he could have been recruited as only a wide receiver if that's the route he wanted to go. He's just such a great defensive back. I think that's his future is defensive back. So I can see him being a two-way player. I don't necessarily think that's beneficial for him necessarily. I think Travis Hunter is an exception. I think if you can focus on one area of your game, typically, that's what the NFL wants. They want you to be as polished as you can. Because I mean, really, NFL teams are not gonna, experiment. It's so elite at the next level that they're not going to really experiment with having somebody go both ways. Maybe Travis Hunter will get to do that. He's such a special case, but I don't think that's going to be something that you're going to see much in the NFL. But maybe they give him a shot to do that. I think he probably is better off spending at least the majority of his time at defensive back, where I think that's really his future. But look, Alabama's down to, if you look at for the bowl game specifically, if you're taking things one game at a time, you've got Ryan Williams, Jeremy Bernard,
they always are.
Rico Scott, Jaron Hamilton's back. So so really, I mean, if you look at the people that are regulars, you're really only down to Ryan Williams and Jeremy Bernard. Jaron Hamilton and Rico Scott have played minimally. I think Rico Scott was the person that was on the other side of that great pass by Austin Mack against Mercer, but that's about it, So it's going to be, I could see a world where Jaylen Mbakwe kind of fits himself into that mix. You need more than four active receivers, and we talked about, some of the players they lost in the portal. They lost Kobe Prentice to the portal. They lost, we mentioned Caleb Odom, Kendrick Law, Emmanuel Henderson. So those are all guys that you would have expected to, contribute in a bowl game. But now you're down to people like Jaron Hamilton and Rico Scott, who might develop into stars, but they weren't a big part of this offense. So yeah, I could see, Jaylen Mbakwe maybe playing a little bit on offense when you're looking at that. It's also, I mean, Alabama certainly wants to win this game, but it's not the end of the world if they don't. So if you make an experiment and you give him some offensive reps and he does horribly, well, you move on, you chalk it up. So yeah.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting with the bowl game, and I think you're right about the long term kind of future, and that's what DeBoer I think seemed to echo was, look, we want to probably develop this guy at where we think he's going to be best, but he rushed for a lot of yards in high school. It was pretty fun looking back at his stats over at Clay Chalkville when he was in high school, because he put up numbers on the offensive side. So yeah, an interesting future in the cards for Jaylen Mbakwe, and a wild kind of transfer saga that sort of embodies what Alabama has been dealing with from kind of a larger scope in this NIL and transfer portal and revolving door world that we're in. So bottom line is he'll be back, and it'll be interesting to see what the Crimson Tide does kind of with him both in the bowl game and moving forward. Of course, Alabama, rejoice. They're not staying complacent in the portal. They added names as well. They have 2 so far, Tony, since we last talked. And I want to stay in the secondary, actually, because I think that's a good segue, and talk about the most recent of the 2 additions, which happened just on Wednesday. And that was, of course, Cameron Calhoun, the freshman cornerback. So Jaylen Mbakwe's position, of course. Alabama adding him from Utah, had a very productive season with the Utes last season. 9 pass deflections, an interception. Also had 21 tackles and a tackle for loss. He comes from Winton Woods High School in Cincinnati. Alabama, this is my fun fact, signed a player in 2025 from the same high school, Justin Hill, a linebacker. So the pipeline from Cincinnati to Tuscaloosa is growing. He signed with Michigan originally, so some relationships with Courtney Morgan there. So a good addition. But Tony, I'm curious what you think of Calhoun, what he maybe brings to the DB room, and what it maybe means for this team's depth chart at corner next season.
Yeah, so we talked about, returning Mbakwe for depth. I think Calhoun at the moment, at least, is a nice depth piece. He'll be he's a rising sophomore, so he'll be a sophomore next season. He tallied those 9 pass deflections despite only having 1 start. Now he played, he played heavily in his, I think, 11 appearances, but still, I mean, he's not like, he was a starter yet. So he definitely was playing at a starter caliber level, and he could potentially be a starter. But Alabama returned Xavier Brown, and they returned Damani Jackson. Now, Xavier Brown seems set for one of those spots. Damani Jackson has an NFL decision to make. He'll be a rising senior. He had a really good season. I just think that he could probably benefit from coming back and improving his draft stock. You haven't seen him mentioned really as a day 2 pick, and he's a guy that has 5-star talent. So I think when you look at a Damani Jackson, you look at any of those kids that have, sometimes if you're not projected as a day 2 pick and you had a good season and you don't have that talent level, you're just like a 3-star kid coming, maybe you just take it. You take the money. Maybe you need the money. For Damani, it seems like, you're a 5-star kid. You're an elite cornerback. If you're not mentioned in the top 3 rounds and you're going to be a starter for your team, probably come back, right? I think he could really be a day 2 guy. Shoot, I mean, with a big season for Alabama, if they totally get better, I mean, the secondary is going to be a lot better this year, so he might get some more help. It might, help his overall tape on the field. I could see him even maybe being a 1st-round pick. We're kind of, it's hard to project these things at this moment, but if Damani Jackson returns, I think Calhoun becomes kind of your backup, depth piece. But that's the good thing about him is he's a sophomore, so really you're set up for, you're really set up with Calhoun for whenever Damani Jackson leaves. Either it's going to be, this year for the NFL draft, and then you probably slot Calhoun in that cornerback spot. You also have Deshaun Jones, who you got from Wake Forest last year. Could also play at one of those cornerback positions, but I think probably it would be Calhoun, or it could be Mbakwe. I never thought, like, you got to mention him as well. So, but like one of those guys, or it's next year when you have, probably, obviously Damani Jackson's going to leave. Maybe you have to put one of those guys in your Husky role, and then maybe somehow you have Jaylen Mbakwe, Xavier Brown, and Calhoun all on the field at the same time. There's a bunch of different ways you can go. We saw what can happen with injuries in the secondary this year, so it's a big deal to have depth. And look, Alabama started a freshman. Xavier Brown did a bang up job considering that he was just thrown into the fire, but that's not ideal. You don't want to throw freshman cornerbacks into the fire. Alabama brought in a pair of Rivals 100 cornerbacks this year. It'd be nice if they could just be easily, like, they're uber talented. Dejon Lee and what's McDonald? Chuck McDonald. Yeah, I'm bad with first names, but those guys are elite blue chip kids that could probably contribute their first year. But if you have the talent and the experience, you probably want to ease them into the transition there. So Alabama will be, at the very least, Alabama will be able to do that now. And I think they're going to be in a much better position in the secondary than they were last year. And you look at the safety position too, right? Keon Sabb was a guy that I thought was probably going to go to the NFL. He was having a really good start to the season. He would have been draft eligible. Then he gets injured for the remainder of the season. That kind of forced his hand. He's coming back. And then, because of his injury, you got a guy like Bray Hubbard, who played and did immaculately well. Like no one was expecting Bray Hubbard to do as well as he did. So now, even though you're losing Malachi Moore, you've got Keon Sabb and Bray Hubbard in the back end of your secondary. Now you could also put Bray Hubbard at Husky, whatever. But you've got things settled in the back end. It looks like you got things settled at the cornerback position. There's a whole slew of people you can play at Husky. I really like what Alabama has in the secondary. There's other spots of the defense, inside linebacker. It looks a little sketchy right now, but as far as the secondary, it's going to be vastly improved.
I completely agree. I think the thing that's lost in all of this with Calhoun coming in is DeBoer has been pretty straight up that they didn't have as many guys as they wanted just from a warm body standpoint. Mm-hmm. So, that alleviates this as well. And you mentioned it. He wants players to be able to play all over the defensive backfield. And so you think of a guy like Deshaun Jones, who, if you have enough depth at corner, you move him somewhere else. Like you said, there's plenty of options at Husky safety. So yeah, I think this is a great addition and a nice long-term kind of upside guy, especially if Damani Jackson does indeed come back and him and Xavier Brown lock down those two corner spots again for next season. So Cameron Calhoun over from Utah. I think that'll be a good addition for the Tide in the secondary.
It's big for a guy like Zay. Sorry to interrupt. It's big like for a guy like Zay Mincy too, who has a safety body, who is probably growing into a safety role. Now you don't have to pigeonhole him or like kind of put him into a cornerback role where maybe he's going to be. I think he's obviously going to be better at a safety position, or maybe that Husky role. I think adding an extra cornerback, improving that cornerback depth where you can kind of allow players to filter into their better positions. And I think that's going to be another thing. And Zay Mincy is a guy that I didn't really talk about as much, but I think he'll really benefit from this move and be able to kind of transition to a safety where I think he can be a very elite safety option for Alabama. So yeah, just even more to that.
Yeah, definitely. DeBoer mentioned him as well as a guy who he thinks is going to be long-term really, really good for Alabama. And I think you're right. It's going to be at the safety position. So that really helps. The other guy, of course, the Tide getting in the portal, also on defense, and a player at a position, like you said, you move to the front of that defense, it gets a little sketchier, but this is a guy who I think they're excited about coming in. Kelby Collins, he was a freshman All-SEC player, comes over from Florida. 2023 had some really good numbers, 23 tackles, 1.5 sacks, like I mentioned, freshman All-SEC honors, playing kind of the defensive end role for Florida, then kind of shifted inside as a sophomore. Numbers not as good, but is now coming back to Alabama, seemingly like he's going to make that switch outside to Bandit. That sounds a little familiar to me, Tony, for a guy maybe named LT Overton that did a similar thing over at Texas A&M. What do you like about Kelby Collins, and what does he bring in terms of immediate help to that defensive line?
Yeah, I mean, he was a freshman All-SEC guy at the edge position, a year ago. And they moved him to more of a 3-tech, and then he really struggled, didn't really even see the field that much. Alabama's going to move him more to the edge. Now, he could still filter inside as well. The biggest thing that we talked about with coaches following Wednesday's little media session was versatility, and so they like a lot of versatility, whether it's in the secondary or whether it's, at the bandit position or defensive line, whatever. Like they like players that can play multiple spots, and that's something that Kelby Collins can do. I think you're going to see him primarily at that bandit role. That's where he has had his biggest success. I think that's where his future lies. But if there is times when Alabama does have to move him inside, they can. They kind of did that with LT Overton. I think it's a really similar situation to LT Overton where, A&M tried to move LT to a different spot where he just didn't, he didn't do what they wanted him to do. I think once you move Kelby Collins to that bandit role, he's going to really excel. The thing is, it's kind of hard to project how much instant impact he's going to have. In our running depth chart, I had Jamarian Latham and LT Overton kind of moving on. Jamarian Latham, I wasn't sure if he was going to come back or not. He has that extra year of eligibility. I was just kind of projecting him to go, but it's kind of looking more like, we'll talk to him today. Maybe he'll shed some light on that, but it's looking more like he could come back. And then you've also had LT Overton, who, I made it a general rule of thumb that if you were projected in the first 3 rounds, I was going to list you as departing on our depth chart. And LT Overton is just kind of sounding like maybe, even though he's been involved or included in a couple of mock drafts in the second and third rounds, I'm not sure if that's necessarily his draft grade. We'll have to see. I think it could make sense for him to come back. So if you return both those guys, all of a sudden, Kelby Collins is like 3rd on the depth chart, even though he's probably got, good enough stats or not stats, but the attributes to kind of to contribute a little bit earlier than that. I think Alabama's going to have a lot of depth at that bandit position, especially if Overton and Latham come back. We saw Latham kind of play that wolf role. I think you're probably going to see him if he and Overton come back. I think you're going to see them split time at bandit, and then Latham kind of split time with Quay Russell at the wolf position. If they want a heavier wolf, maybe Latham. If they want a quicker wolf, maybe Quay. There's different things they can do. Keep people fresh, rotate a lot. That they're going to be able to rotate heavy amounts. And then I think, depending on how that works, I think you'll see Kelby Collins kind of slot in. But then again, I mentioned, if you need somebody that can go inside, he can do that as well. So there's, it's kind of different. I would list, Kelby as maybe the number 2 behind 1A and 1B, Overton and Latham. Now, if Latham and Overton both leave, or if one of them leaves, obviously Kelby's going to go up. You've also got Cavante Henry, JUCO transfer that's coming in. You've got people like Keon Keeley, who Kane Womack, the defensive coordinator, spoke very highly of, said he was as excited about Kelby Collins, or not Kelby Collins, he's excited about Keon Keeley as he's ever been. You've got guys like Jordan Renaud. So you've got a ton of depth at that Bandit position. They wouldn't have brought in Kelby Collins if they didn't see him making an impact. At the very least, he, provides insurance. You don't really know what Overton and Latham's going to do, but I think he's, probably going to see the field a lot this year, and then definitely in the future for sure.
Yeah, I would agree. It's interesting with the versatility piece. I don't know if, it doesn't seem like the defensive tackle experiment worked for him at Florida. Maybe something can change in Freddie Roach's unit if you could, in theory, kick him back inside. But I think you're right. I think ultimately he provides, like you said, that cover at the Bandit spot. And I think that position is in, weirdly a good position, despite what we had been projecting kind of early on. But we'll obviously see, what goes on with some of those draft decisions. And, that will certainly impact what Alabama does.
Yeah, I mean, and there's no telling if you're gonna hold on to some of those other guys. I mean, I'm not gonna speak for other people, but if Overton and Latham do come back, is that going to force somebody like Jeremiah Beeman or Renaud or maybe even Keeley are they going to think about leaving? You know what I'm saying? Like, it's just the world we live in now that happens. So. What Alabama has like 7 or 8 Bandits now, if you include Latham and Overton, and only one of them can see the field at a time. That's probably won't be the case. They'll probably lose a Bandit if that's the case. But who knows? They have a lot of versatility, and that's always a good thing.
A large band of bandits that could lose one if all those guys come back. Yeah, we'll definitely keep an eye on that position. Just quickly, Tony, looking ahead now, what are some other spots that Alabama is really looking to add in now going forward? I know, the main 2 that come to my mind are, obviously we talked about it at the opening, is wide receiver, considering you only have 4 scholarship guys available to you right now. Gonna kind of change things up as we go. But the 2 that come to my mind are receiver and offensive lineman for me. But where do you see them maybe, kind of
see, like receiver, it's more of a problem for the bowl game than it is for I mean, obviously when you lose 4 receivers to the portal, you're going to have to add, but they did get Meadows, they did get Latsier Brooks, so there are reinforcements that can play. They're just not going to be there for the bowl game because they're freshmen. But Derek Meadows is coming in, Brooks. You can't forget about guys like Jalen Hale, who was lost for the season. He'll be back. You've got guys like Cole Adams, who he suffered a season-ending injury, so it's not as dire at receiver. I think it's trending pretty heavily towards them getting Isaiah Horton, the 6'4" receiver from Miami. He's a perfect addition for that X role. I think you can kind of put him at the X. Depending on who else you get. I know that they're looking at Casey Concepcion from NC State. I heard Casey some of the numbers I've heard behind him, he's going to be rather expensive. So I mean, Alabama will have to open up. Maybe that will go into the
back to Greg Byrne.
Greg Byrne. Maybe that maybe they can stir up some of the coffers there. But if they were to get a guy like that, maybe he'd play the slot. Horton would play the X. I think you only list 3 receivers on a depth chart, but really Alabama's going to play with 4 a lot. Ryan Williams can be kind of that swing guy where he can go play out on X, but then he can also help out in the slot. I think Jeremy Bernard's your Z. So yeah, I think getting Horton as that big X, I think really, ideally, if you look at what Kalen DeBoer has done in Washington, you think of that big X at Rome Odunze. Isaiah Horton is that body, and he obviously hasn't yet had Rome Odunze's production, but he's a guy that you could be optimistic that would kind of have that breakout season. So that would be a big addition. It looks like they're going to make that. But then he also, Kalen DeBoer also likes to have speed at that X position. So I think while Horton is a guy that you can leave in isolation, he can beat press coverage. I think Ryan Williams is a guy that just can take off the top of the defense at that spot. So you can kind of mix and match around. You can't just pigeonhole somebody into one role and receiver. I could see them adding Horton. I could see them adding a slot as well. That H receiver position. That's about all I could see at receiver. I think they're pretty set. Other than that, tight end is a spot where they're losing CJ Dupree, they're losing Robbie Utes. They return Josh Cuevas, but he's more of an H-back. So, you're going to need somebody that can really block. You're going to need an inline tight end. Danny Lewis Jr. returning is big for that. Before, when he entered the transfer portal, I was kind of thinking, oh man, they're in really big trouble. At the moment, Danny Lewis is probably a starter. That's why I was so confused when Danny Lewis entered the transfer portal. It's because he had waited all this time and now he's, pretty much in line to start. You almost wonder, Alabama missed out on a target. The kid
Luke,
from
Luke has.
Yeah, Luke has. Look, I don't know behind the scenes, but it kind of makes you wonder was there some communication between Alabama, between Danny Lewis, basically saying okay, we're going to get Haz and he's going to be our guy. And then Lewis was like, okay, well, I'm not going to wait another year. And now that Alabama didn't get Haz, are they kind of did they go back and tell Danny Lewis, okay, look, you can start. And so maybe they don't go. I don't know. I think you still need a depth piece at tight end. I wouldn't be surprised if they don't bring in if the addition of tight end isn't a sexy tight end.
Mm-hmm.
It might just be a guy that can block really well. And you look at his numbers and it's not going to get people excited, but they don't need a playmaker at tight end. That's not, Cuevas is that guy if there's going to be that guy. And it's not really a huge part of this offense. I think, yes, they throw to the tight end, but I think everything they do there can be done through Cuevas. I think you need blockers, especially with you look at, you've got Elijah Pritchett and Wilkin Formby coming back at that right tackle spot, but who knows what the production you're going to get from the tackle spot. Having that extra blocker might be essential, especially with a new quarterback that, a lot of times new quarterbacks hold on to the ball too long. So I think getting a blocking tight end will be big. They were able to kind of address some of the edge rushing problem, with Kelby Collins. If there's a big time edge rusher that comes into the portal, how could you say no to him if you have the money? That's the thing, though. Those guys are very expensive. But if you look at, maybe it's just me. And, to be honest, he did admirable. Just because Jamarian Latham can play the Wolf position, I don't love that. He is big to play that Wolf position. I like Quay Russell there. I think Quay Russell can be a star, but Alabama is going to need a Will Anderson, a Dallas Turner level, a guy that can just get home. I think when you look at what was wrong with this defense, a lot of it, look at those third down problems. A lot of it is Alabama couldn't get home. They couldn't get sacks. So, it's not like they were giving up always 3rd and 2. They were giving up 3rd and 8, 3rd and 9. And it's because their quarterback could wriggle out of something and make a play. If you get an elite pass rusher, and maybe they'll develop that, maybe they'll add it, but that's what you need to stop and to get off the field. Maybe that's Quay Russell, maybe that's Kelby Collins. Maybe that's another year of LT Overton, but you need somebody to do that. So that's a position. And then, I can't believe I waited this long to say this one, but inside linebacker, you're going to lose Jahad Campbell. I still hold out for Alabama's sake, maybe 3% hope that Deontay Lawson comes back. Look, talk about
AWS
guys that
analytics
have a ton of talent. At the beginning of the season, I would have said no. And even at up until he got hurt, I would say absolutely not. He's gone. He's had such a great season. He's gone. He's proven himself. He's got NFL body. But you look at him and you think, is he a day 2 guy? No. He's probably maybe if he wasn't injured, maybe you could, see him sneaking into that third round, but I think he's probably fourth, fifth after the injury. And who knows? I'm not an NFL scout. Don't necessarily quote me on that, but I think he's a guy that if he came back could maybe improve his status to be that day 2 pick. Do I expect him to do so? Maybe not. I think he could probably leave as well. He's a team captain. He's done a lot at Alabama already. He's got a lot of, good film out there for NFL scouts to look at, and he'll come back from his injury. It's not like something that, he should be too worried about. At the same time, though, you just got to think like maybe he could improve his draft stock. If Deontay Lawson came back to Alabama, that would be absolutely huge. They need help at those interior linebacker positions because you're going to lose your 2 probably best tacklers and Jahad Campbell and Deontay Lawson. If they could just return Deontay Lawson, there's no way they return Jahad Campbell at all. Like he's first round pick. I don't think people realize how good Jahad Campbell is. And we've had people on the board. We've had people on the board like mention like, oh, is Jahad Campbell leaving for NIL money? Is like, no, he's leaving for NFL money. Like he's going to be a first round pick. If Jahad Campbell is not a first round pick, he'll be one of the first people taken on day 2 of the draft. So, they're going to need, you got Justin Okoronkwo. You're also losing Justin Jefferson though. So, I mean, like you've got some guys in the middle, Jeremiah Alexander, Justin Okoronkwo, adding people like Luke Metz, right? Is that his name? Yeah.
Yep.
I got to get better with these recruits. That's kind of your territory. But
they'll embed Luke Metz, Duke Johnson. They added a bunch.
Yeah, Duke Johnson's another one. I mean, so they've got some guys, but I mean, it's really like we talked about with the cornerback position,
long term.
You don't really want to throw those guys into the middle. You remember the I think it was the 2021 season where they lost whatever the season they played Duke at the beginning, and they have to play. Shane Lee is a true freshman at linebacker. It wasn't pretty. You don't want to play true freshmen at linebacker. I don't think that's going to be the route Alabama is going to go with. So I think that that's probably a situation where they would like to add at least an experienced guy. So we'll have to see how they go about doing that. But yeah.
Yeah, there's plenty of positions I think that they're still going to pursue, and the portaling is not over for Alabama as they kind of continue on this next couple weeks. Of course, there's the spring window as well. That's a shorter period, but Alabama could bring some reinforcements there as well. But we'll have everything monitored over on Tide Illustrated and locked in for some players that Alabama might look to add at an abundance of positions. Tony, I figured we finish on a fun note. And aside from transfer portal, there is still football going on. Of course, we'll have bowl game coverage continuing as we get closer to Alabama's game against Michigan. And this might be bitter for Tide fans, as they, of course, did miss the college football playoff. But we had been doing picks all season long on this show. This is going to drop Friday morning, right before the college football playoff starts. I thought we could pick some of the first round college football playoff games.
Look, guys, for anyone's listening, Jack is just so down in picks. He's just trying to make a desperate attempt at a comeback by trying to extend this into the playoffs. But I will happily indulge and increase my lead on him. So,
yeah,
that's what we're doing right now. We're trying to get Jack back in the game. It's futile. It won't happen. But I'm humoring him, and we're doing that.
I'm sure I will pick some Cinderellas that will surely end any sort of comeback chances. But here we go anyway. Let's pick the first 4 college football playoff matchups. We're going to start. I'm just going to go in chronological order with these games. We'll start for the Lone Friday game on December 20th. Number 10 Indiana and number 7 Notre Dame. An in-state battle in South Bend, Indiana. I really hope it snows. Excited for these campus games. Notre Dame, Tony, favored by 7 points, the same amount as their seed at home.
I grew up rooting for Notre Dame a little bit. My family, I grew up Catholic. My family, they're always on TV. My dad always gives me a hard time because I usually just don't pick Notre Dame. I don't like, and my dad was like, "Did you just hate Notre Dame now?" Like I visited Notre Dame with my dad on a trip, when I was in high school. Like I wasn't like a huge Notre Dame fan, but like I did pull for them. I had a Notre Dame sweatshirt. Okay, and so. Here, if Dad, which he's not listening because I don't know if he listens to the pod, which is sad, but Dad, if you are listening, I'm picking Notre Dame here. I don't think Indiana in any terms belongs to be that belongs in this playoff. They're a nice story, but Notre Dame is an actual playoff caliber team against what I don't think is a playoff caliber team. And so I know they're getting 7 points, but I'm still taking Notre Dame by more than 7.
I'm right there with you. I'm going to be rooting my heart out for Indiana. I love that they made the playoff. I really hope that they can just continue to make people angry by maybe winning a game or just shut the doubters up. I don't think they're going to do that. I think this Notre Dame team's good. I also think this Notre Dame team has a pretty damn good path going forward, having to face a Georgia team that might not have Carson Beck if they beat Indiana. So that's a story for another week. But I'm also going to go with the Fighting Irish of Notre Dame. Next one, 3 games on Saturday. First, over in Happy Valley, the Penn State Nittany Lions, the 6 seed, 8.5-point favorites against the SMU Mustangs, which of course lost and prevented Alabama from making the playoff over Clemson. We'll get to Clemson in a second. But yeah, Penn State, 8.5-point favorites. Do you like them at home against SMU?
I have 2 questions for you.
Yes.
This is a common theme in my Penn State picks.
All right.
Is Penn State's opponent ranked?
Yes.
Okay. Is James Franklin Penn State's head coach?
Yes, he is.
I'm picking SMU.
I'm actually going to do the same thing. I follow your logic there. He can't win the big one. Give me the Mustangs. They're going to use that comeback effort against Clemson. I think it's going to spur them on. I like SMU here. Next game, I mentioned Clemson. They're playing Texas in Austin, a game that I know selfishly you and I would have loved to have gone to if Alabama had managed to draw Texas. That would have been fun. The Longhorns favored by 12, Tony. Do you like them to cover that spread, or do you like the upstart Tigers that snuck into the playoff as the ACC auto bid to pull an upset or at least cover?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of the number that like cutoff would be. It might be more like 23. I think I would take Texas by 20. I think it's not even going to be close. I think it's going to be an embarrassment. I think I think it's going to be one of those things that people point to those with playoff. It's just I don't think Clemson's going to be there. I kind of said mockingly about my pick for SMU over Penn State was kind of more about how much I hate Penn State in terms of I just don't believe in them at all. Mm-hmm. But I really don't believe I'm not high on SMU, and I'm definitely not high on Clemson. I like Cade Klubnik, but I just don't like Clemson. They almost blew that game against SMU, which they had no business blowing. It was basically a home game. I think Texas just absolutely routes them. I don't see Texas losing back-to-back games. I know Texas hasn't had the toughest path, but I just think Texas by a lot. So I'll take them by more than 12.
I'm in agreement. I think Texas will win this one in a landslide. They are the more talented team. Then last one, Tony, the 9-8 matchup in Columbus, Ohio. The Buckeyes, 7.5-point favorites at home against the Tennessee Volunteers. I'm excited for this game. I think this is just a purely good matchup, no matter where these two teams stand. I just think Tennessee versus Ohio State is fun. 7.5 point favorites are the Buckeyes. Who do you like in this one?
Ryan Day is another coach that just can't win the big one. I'm tempted to pick Ohio State. I'm definitely not going to pick Ohio State with the points. So I'm definitely going to Tennessee. I'm not sure if I'm picking them to win outright, but I definitely think it's going to be close. You look at Tennessee, they're kind of similar they're a better version of the Michigan team that beat Ohio State. They've got a great defensive line. Mm-hmm. They've got a better quarterback. They've got a really good running game with Dylan Sampson. I think they could definitely cause Ohio State problems. And you look at this is an Ohio State team that lost its left tackle, lost its Remington award-winning center. Shout out to Seth McLaughlin, former Alabama player who won the Remington. I mean, so they lost the first-round pick tackle, the best center in college football. And going up against the defensive line, you saw how much problems they gave Alabama. I like the Vols here. I don't know if I like them enough to pick them, but I definitely like them enough to cover. I think the whole weather thing's overrated. I really hope that, some of these games, I guess this is the only time, you got Happy Valley too. I don't trust it with SMU, but I really hope that, my biggest wish is that it would just be an absolute blizzard at Happy Valley in Columbus, and that SMU and Tennessee would just come in and knock the ever living crap out of those two teams. And we can just get rid of this whole, these Northern teams, the
Built
weather is
different.
just going to be the ultimate equaling factor. I don't agree with it. I'm a huge Southern football homer. I just think that Southern football is just so much better than Northern football. I know you're from Wisconsin. I don't know if you agree. I think that kind of goes towards, I mentioned earlier about my dad and that Notre Dame, hate that he gives me a hard time for. I think it's more just the fact that I just don't believe in Northern football. So I am going to pick Tennessee. I don't know to win, but this is going to be close. I think I'm going to pick the upset. It doesn't really matter in our picks because the points will cover me. But yeah, I'm going to pick the upset and pick the Vols.
Well, I don't know, quite where I stand in the Northern Southern football debate, but I am absolutely going with Tennessee. I think this team is a lot overlooked going into the playoff. People are talking about how they can't generate enough offense. I don't know. I watched them generate a pretty damn high amount of offense against Alabama. I know Iamaliava isn't super proven, but
I wouldn't call it damn high. They had like 3 yards in the first half.
I like Tennessee's offense. I actually think it's
after
good.
the defense just wore, after Alabama kept its defense on the field. I think you got Dylan Sampson is a good offensive player. I kind of buy Tennessee not having a lot of offense, but
I like him. I think Iamaliava is going to figure it out. I think Sampson's a perfect guy.
They've got a ceiling for sure.
An outlet guy. I like Tennessee. I think they're going to win this game. And like you said, it goes back to I'm the same way with Ryan Days. With James Franklin. That guy can't win big games. So
no, neither of those guys.
They're not built for it.
If they would play each other again, but yeah.
Born on third base.
Can really win big games is if they play each other. So.
Born on third base is Ryan Day, and it'll stay that way. Give me the Vols. All right, there you go. We're in alignment. We got all four picks in agreement. So
did we pick? Did you pick every single pick I did?
I did. I matched you.
So, you had the opportunity to this whole thing where you could have.
I actually wasn't even going to count this toward our regular season points. I was just more doing it for fun.
Matter now because
you built a narrative, which
you deprived yourself. You ran out of bounds on fourth down.
I slid with 9 seconds left and no timeouts, like Dak Prescott against the 49ers in the playoffs.
Or what's his face?
Or I Dan Orlovsky'd myself. Is that what you're trying to say?
Oh my gosh, the Will Howard.
Oh yes, or Will Howard. Yeah.
So
costed Ohio State against Oregon. That would have been a big win in Eugene. But there you go. I'm gonna enjoy the playoff games. I'm excited to watch these and see what chaos ensues. So we'll see how it goes. But wanted to end it on some playoff fun notes. We'll have everything transfer portal wise covered over on Tide Illustrated. Go subscribe there. Subscribe here on the YouTube. We'll obviously have another show in the next few days with any other updates that inevitably happen from this crazy, crazy world of the Alabama transfer portal. Maybe we'll get Greg Byrne on and he can talk about his letter.
We will almost assuredly not get Greg Byrne on.
He has an open invite to the show. Anytime you want to come on, Greg, you're welcome to. Anyway, that'll do it for Tide Pod. We'll be back in a couple days for another show. Till then, see you next time.